Wow, I'm so excited. It feels a little surreal. I did treatment through NOCD, so I'm like, oh man, being on this side of things is, I guess it just goes to show that things do work out, you know? So I'll just introduce myself to start. My name's Mackenzie. I am from Washington State, currently live in Portland, Oregon. I was diagnosed with OCD in the fourth grade, but that diagnosis was kind of just, oh, you're diagnosed. And then I spent a very long time kind of white knuckling my way through the rest of it until I got treatment later. So I guess I'm just going to kind of start like at the very beginning and go from there. um, so I showed a lot of signs as a kid. My mom actually has OCD, and so I think my parents were sort of like on the lookout for it, which I do feel really lucky about because I think like it could have been really blindsiding for them, and instead they were kind of like, "Yeah, I think I know what's going on here." And it started like probably when I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6, just kind of we called it like worrying about things. Like and it wasn't just not just worrying because, anxiety in all forms is distressing, but it was repetitive worrying to the point where I had extended family that referred to me lovingly as repeat girl. Um, and it was things like, repeating myself multiple times to make sure that the people that heard me and they weren't upset. So I'd be asking people over and over again things like, are you upset with me? Are you mad at me? Are you mad at me? Was kind of the big one. And that was kind of this like intrinsic core thing like, am I bad? Are you mad at me? That kind of manifested at a young age. In terms of a very specific like what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, Subtype. I know we kind of there. It's all the same, right? But in terms of like a specific kind of thought process that started happening, the first thing that hit me really intensely was harm OCD. And so I don't even really remember what triggered it. It could have been anything, movie, book, whatever. But I just remember kind of this like lightning bolt like moment where I had this thought of like, what if I, went to the kitchen and got a knife and hurt people and hurt my family and it just like wouldn't go away. It was just like, like I sat there and I was like, of course I wouldn't do that. Why would I do that? And, as we all know, the more you think that, the more it becomes kind of rooted inside of you. And then that's all you can think about. And so that was kind of like this moment where it became not just like, oh, she's worrying. And it became like, oh, like this is deeply distressing, inconsolable, couldn't go to school for a week. And so my parents were kind of, I think at first, like, we know what's going on. We can figure this out. But there just wasn't a lot out there. And I took a supplement that I think probably was more placebo than anything. I got a book. That was kind of the only book available for kids. And it was very focused on compulsions, kind of outward compulsions, but a lot of the things I was struggling with were really internal. And I was doing a lot of checking and confessing and things like that, that I didn't really see echoed in the book. So then I kind of just thought, well, like, obviously I don't have OCD because I'm not doing the things this kid's doing. I'm thinking the worst things you could ever think ever. And so it just kind of kept going and it would kind of, as we know, OCD goes up and down. So it'd be manageable and then it wouldn't be manageable. And then, I'd go to school and then there'd be a month where all of a sudden it was like, my world was crashing down and like no one could talk me out of it and we just didn't know what to do like as a family, and so a lot of the time it would be me confessing every single thought I ever had to my mom or my dad, and then them basically saying, well, we know you wouldn't do that, so here's some reassurance, we know you wouldn't do that. I remember one time my dad asked, well, think about how bad it would be to go to jail. And I was like, yeah, no, that would be bad. I don't want that. And I don't blame him. We were just trying to figure out the best way forward. And I started to kind of partition my brain into the good the good brain and the bad brain. So when I was good, it was the good brain. When I was having OCD, it was the bad brain. And it almost felt like this part of me that was just intrinsically wrong and that I was trying to keep sort of at bay. So kind of my worst case scenario would have been that my peers found out about this, because in my head it was like, this is something truly wrong with me. And if they were to find out, like they would throw me in prison probably. So yeah, I just kind of dealt with it. I created coping mechanisms, and I think sometimes we feel shame for those things, but oftentimes, as we know, there are just survival tactics, right? So I really dove into compulsions, and they helped in the way that they do, which is to help short term make it worse long term. But they allowed me to function. Um, and I just did a lot of those. I discovered Reddit pretty early on. So I'd have a disturbing thought, I'd Google it, I'd put OCD at the end, I'd click on the first Reddit thread I found and read until I felt better. Eventually you run out of Reddit threads, I discovered, and then nothing can convince you that the thing that you're thinking is OCD. And so, yeah, I developed a lot of compulsions like that. I developed, it would sort of swap too. So it'd go from, harm OCD to relationship OCD to the really disturbing ones that, I mean, they're all disturbing, but just like, what if I did something bad to my dog? What if I did something bad to my sister? Just horrible things in your head that like you don't know how to stop. And I started kind of picturing OCD as this void that I was fighting, and it had a gravitational pull. And if I stopped fighting, it was going to pull me all the way to the bottom, and the bad brain would be the only thing left. And that was pretty much my perception of it for a really long time. I treated it with compulsions. I was also raised in kind of a Reformed Christian context. And so I developed a lot of prayer compulsions. I did a lot of asking for forgiveness, confessing, sort of praying that I might have a stronger faith so the anxiety would go away. Those things were sort of reinforced. So I just kind of kept doing them because I was like, if I have a really strong faith, maybe like God will make it go away. And it really wasn't until like high school that I started thinking like maybe this doesn't have to be kind of this massive secret. Like maybe I don't tell people that I have OCD. Maybe I just tell them that I'm anxious. And I remember sitting in a room with my friends, and they were all kind of like saying things they were struggling with. And I was in my head going, just say that you're anxious. Just, you can do it. Just say it. Tell them that like you're anxious sometimes. And it got to me, and I don't know, I threw it. I said something else entirely, like I'm really stressed out at school or something, like just could not get myself to say it. Um, and it really wasn't until I made a friend during the summer in summer camp that was sort of open with me about how she had experienced some, I forget what the wording was she used, but it was kind of this covert way of saying like, I've experienced obsessions and compulsions. And I was like, like I've literally never met someone who has also experienced these things. And kind of in a moment of, I don't know, just bravery, I guess, I told her that summer I had been really, really struggling with harm OCD, and like the non-rejection that I experienced uh, was kind of like the first time in my life I told someone outside of my family, and they hadn't like, I had never done that, so I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought maybe she was going to like boo me and like call the cops or something, but she was just like, that's really hard. Like, here's what I've experienced. And I think that is like one of the single most life-changing moments of my life. I just remember kind of like floating on a cloud, like, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. And then it was like, now other people know too. So you sort of have to teach yourself that this isn't got to be this thing where you're suddenly like alone. And so I went to college, and I knew I was going to be rooming with someone and I was going to be away from home, and that I had never gone for like a year without having OCD. So I was like, okay, either I'm going to be like really masking my obsessions for like a whole year, or eventually like my friends here are going to figure it out. And I remember being in a Psych 101 class, and my professor was like, everyone pick a topic about, a mental health thing, and research it, present to the class. And I was sitting in the library late at night, Googling like research about roommates telling their roommates that they have obsessive compulsive disorder. There actually is research about this. I discovered just like a trial, or like people kind of like telling someone like their mental health diagnosis and kind of rating the reaction. And I was reading these accounts very compulsively, just trying to find enough of them to like sort of make myself feel like it was going to be okay. Um, of course, none of them convinced me. But I kind of knew that during this project, I wanted to talk about OCD. And so I kind of just went to my roommate and I said, what do you know about this? What do you know about obsessive compulsive disorder? The answer is typically like not that much, because we just don't have a lot. We at the time didn't have a lot out there about it that wasn't like obsessive Christmas disorder or whatever, whatever the joke things are. And so I kind of just explained like really surface level, this is kind of how my brain works. And she was like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And there wasn't this big fallout. So I thought, okay, um, I I can probably make this happen. I can probably um, do this presentation in class. I'm just not going to be that specific about it. I'm just going to present about OCD, and I don't even have to say that I have it. And so I made the presentation, got to class, presented on OCD, and immediately just like person after person was coming up to me and asking more questions, and being like, I think my sister might have this. I've experienced these things. Just like so many people that I kind of just started like sharing by default, and being like, just because it's hard not to when you're relating with people and you're experiencing this community. So I started kind of sharing more detail than I think I had anticipated sharing. And all of it was met with just like curiosity and acceptance. And I don't think that's always the case for those of us with OCD. I think that there's still a lot of stigma out there. Like we know there is, but I think that community is less hard to come by than I had thought it would be in my head when I was kind of growing up, hiding all of these things. And so presenting in college and kind of realizing that people were willing to share when they like felt a kinship with you, I guess I tucked it away in the back of my head. Still didn't go to therapy, but just kind of thought, okay, I might not have to mask every symptom, or um, live in this way where I'm scared of people finding out forever. And college kind of went on, and I maintained it because I maintain it well when I'm busy. And so just by default of having classes all the time and being in college, I was like, I think maybe I'm cured. I think I haven't had this crazy relapse in a really long time. I think maybe I'm never going to ever again. And I don't even have to do exposure therapy. That was kind of like what was going on in my head. Even though I was doing my same kind of maintenance compulsions all the time in the background, I just kind of felt like this is the most manageable my life has ever felt. And so it's probably just going to be like this. But the fear that it wouldn't be was still like very ever present, because I still had not figured out like when you hit that moment where you're about to kind of spike in your anxiety. In my head, there was something I could do right before that to get it to not happen. And I didn't know how to interrupt that moment and not get pulled into this kind of like void that I thought existed. And graduating college, it was 2019. We were like, yes, like the world is ahead of us. And then like 9 months later, COVID hit. And about a month before that, I got engaged. And so, and by the way, like throughout my relationship, we had sort of had these moments where I was having like relationship OCD, but it had never like kind of crazy spiked. Like, and I had told my husband, my now husband, that I have OCD, and he understood that. And but we kind of like were managing it. As soon as we got engaged and then everything locked down, I went like non-responsive, like one of the worst relapses of OCD I've ever had. We were living in an apartment with one of our friends, and I was just like, could not get myself out of this fog, like, was not eating, needed like prescription medication to deal with the nausea of just like how my body felt from the amount of anxiety that I was having. And this whole time I was like, I have to break up with him. Like I don't love him anymore. Um, that was like my every waking thought. I knew it wasn't true, but I couldn't get it out of my head. And I had to sit there and like confess to him. And luckily, he's amazing, and he sort of knew what was happening. And we went to my talk therapist about it. But um, it kind of was the kick that I needed to be like, okay, I thought in college that I had figured this out. I thought it was good, and I knew what I was doing, and kind of what compulsions could help me. And now I'm seeing that like my whole world can come crumbling down. And I'm not as well as I thought I was. And so um, I was seeing a talk therapist, but she was not an OCD therapist. And it just kind of, I still see her actually, but she understood I left for a time to find an OCD specific therapist. And I actually went to NOCD. First round, they explained what my exposures were going to be. And I said, that sounds really hard. And so I was like, yeah, totally do that. And then just didn't do it. It didn't help because I didn't do it. And I was still living in this up and down and up and down and up and down kind of way that my life had always operated. And so the second time around, I went into it going, okay, I need to take this seriously. I need to do this for real. And maybe it will help. I was still really skeptical, honestly, that it was going to like help as much as it ended up helping me. Um, because it sounded so overwhelmingly terrible to attempt after a lifetime of doing the exact opposite thing. And so I just kind of resisted it. But my therapist was great. No CD let me on again. Um, and I did it again. And this time I also did some support groups, both through NOCD and elsewhere. And the thing that really actually changed it for me was meeting a couple people in a support group, and we formed like a text group chat. And then it was kind of like, okay, I'm doing therapy, I'm really struggling. And we'd text each other. And it was like I had sort of been trying to use ERP as just yet another um, coping mechanism. And without having community, it wasn't doing it because I wasn't able to push myself to do it. I felt too alone in it. And so having other people who are doing it as well would just really totally change the game. And it was like really scary and very deeply hard at first. And then it just sort of becomes this thing that you can do. And what it taught me was that this kind of like void that I had been envisioning my entire life as this thing that could like pull me in and take me under and like erase everything about me except for the OCD part of me, um, doesn't actually exist. And you hit a spike and you go as hard into it as your brain is going to take you, and then you come back out and you still exist, and your brain is still there, and everything about you still exists. um, and that knowing that has given me the type of stability in my life that I've never had before, because there was just this overarching fear that like eventually I was not going to be strong enough to resist this like pull into this thing that I couldn't get myself out of. And like, I think we hit really low points where it feels like you've kind of hit that rock bottom. But there's never going to be this experience with OCD that completely erases everything about you, even though it feels like it's going to. And so I think going to therapy really reinforced that for me. And it also gave me the sort of strength to start making art about my experiences. So around this time, I was also coping by drawing comics about how I was doing. And I was kind of scared to post them, honestly. They were extremely vulnerable, and I've always drawn as like a coping mechanism, even in therapy sometimes. But the idea of posting, like, here are my obsessions and compulsions, was like, even though I had gone to support groups and shared with friends and done all these things, it still felt like this one step further, where now just anyone who goes to my Instagram is going to see like what my obsessions and compulsions are. And um, I posted the first one and just kind of like did that thing where you like hit post and then like throw your phone across the room. Um, and the response to it was like people I had known forever were DMing me and being like, I have OCD too. I was like, like we've known each other for forever and I didn't know that. But then they could say the same about me because we just didn't share. And so uh, that has been what has propelled me forward into my career of creating work about this, because I've connected with other creators. There's this whole community online, and making art has been like one of the most healing things that I can do in conjunction with therapy and community. And it has like built for me this understanding about myself and the world, and also allowed other people into the conversation. And so I recently got to illustrate a book written by a girl who is now, I think, 13. Um, at the time she wrote her manuscript, she was like 11. And it was like this full circle moment where I was like, that here's this girl who is, around the age I was when I was diagnosed. And she just wrote the most beautiful manuscript about her experience with OCD, with harm OCD, um, to be published in a book. And she wants like people to read it. And it was like, here's me in fourth grade, hoping no one ever, 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 ever finds out about this. And here's this girl who has just written a book about it, and I get to illustrate it for her. And it was just kind of this moment of like, okay, like, things turn out okay. um, and we got to go present to her elementary class, and she's just the most incredible person, and she's gotten therapy already, and her parents know what's going on. And it's just like, I think it brought me back to being that kid. And I think it kind of healed something. So yeah, that's kind of my whole thing. It feels scary, and it feels like it always will be. And I think the best advice I ever got, and I don't even know where I heard this, and I wish I did, was just that the way you're feeling right now will not last forever. So I do say that to myself quite a lot. Um, yeah.
Love that. McKenzie, thank you so much for sharing your story. Wow, the story about the little girl almost made me cry. That would have been really healing for me too. And I love
Yeah.
how I feel like so much has changed within the past 10 years, honestly, when it comes to OCD awareness, at least. And I think that's just like a beautiful metaphor of that, like
Yeah.
she was able to get diagnosed treatment because there's been so much more awareness, and people
Hmm.
get it. That is incredible. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing about, your sometimes taboo obsessions and compulsions. It's hard to talk about. So it's going to make other people want to talk about theirs too. So that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for having me on. And I've listened to other people, OCD stories, podcasts, things like that.
Yeah.
Just like keeps the train rolling of people sharing. So,
Absolutely.
I can do
Totally.
that.
I did have a question for you. So where are you at right now with your OCD and mental health journey?
Yeah, so I've done kind of the full cycle of exposures for the specific like obsessions I was dealing with at the time and learn the skills. And so now, when I need to check in with my therapist, I do. When I need to do exposures, I do. But I think that sense of like, um, there are ways to handle this that are healthy, has given me a lot more control over my life. And also, most of the people in my life that I'm really close with know when to spot that I am having obsessions and doing compulsions, and are very honest with me about, we're not going to give you reassurance, things like that. And that has helped a lot too. So it's still obviously present, and always will be, but it's now feels like I know how to handle it.
Love it. Yeah. It's really sweet. I feel like um my story is very not exactly similar, but similar in some ways. So it was kind of healing for me listening to you talk, honestly, because
Oh,
yeah, we share a lot of similarities when it comes to that. So thank you. But how
yeah.
about we get into some Q&A time? And if you haven't already, please feel free to submit your questions for McKenzie the next few minutes. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, or McKenzie will. We love this time, just a fun way to get to know people more. So there's a Q&A box at the bottom. Like I said earlier, if you want to ask her any questions, feel free. And we can get started.
Awesome.
So first question we have is, when you said you didn't experience outward compulsions as much, if I'm understanding that right, I was wondering, how did you know that you had OCD besides knowing you had a diagnosis? I thought compulsions were a required criteria, and I've been wondering if I might have OCD. So I wanted to hear more about your experience.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, compulsions can take all, forms, right? And a lot of the representation at the time was a lot about like symmetry or things like that. So as a kid, I had kind of envisioned OCD as being like counting or repetitive actions, checking things like light switches and stuff, which are all very valid compulsions. But a lot of the things that I did were in my head. So I do a lot of repeating to myself, praying over and over again, confessing to my parents, or researching and trying to find something that really matched my exact thought. So I could kind of reassure myself that someone who has OCD has also had this thought. So, kind of any reassurance seeking behavior is like what I learned is also compulsive. And at the time, I didn't know. I mean, I really was like disturbed by the idea that I was just having these horrible thoughts, and couldn't quite find a match for someone with OCD that I knew of that could kind of prove to me that I actually had OCD. But my mom recognized it. She also had a very more like mental experience with OCD. I mean, it's all mental. You know what I'm saying? Her compulsions were more in her head as well. So she kind of recognized it, and then um, going to a psychiatrist and getting an official diagnosis also kind of helped with that.
Yeah, totally. I think a lot of people don't understand, or they just see that compulsions are just like tapping things, or you have to
Hmm.
close certain things, or, touch certain things. And while that truly could be their compulsion, that's not always the case for people with
Hmm.
OCD. It's compulsions or anything mental or physical to try to get rid of the anxiety that come with your obsessions, and that can be literally anything that you're doing to try to get that relief as soon as possible.
Hmm.
And I've actually only experienced mental compulsion. So I think that was
Yeah.
hard to know what I was struggling with too, is because I wasn't doing anything outward, I didn't understand. So thanks for
Yeah.
answering that.
Yeah.
Next question. It looks like, okay, you talked a little bit about how you had times where your OCD was really bad, for lack of better words, and then times where maybe it wasn't. Can you kind of expand on were those, when you consider them episodes, like how long would that time last where you were struggling? Would it just go away?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the way that I kind of see it looking back now is like, I would have the kind of spike of an obsession where it would be all I could think about, usually in the summertime, honestly, because I wasn't at school, and kind of masking around my peers made me deal with the uncertainty in kind of an interesting way. It almost was an exposure to go to school because I couldn't engage in a lot of the compulsive behaviors I could when I was at home all the time and had unlimited access to asking my parents to reassure me. Um, and so during the summertime, it would just, I would get into the loop a lot more. I would really not be able to stop myself from doing all of the compulsions versus, um, distraction works wonders when you're not, when you don't know what else to do. And so in school, it would kind of go to the back of my mind. That's not to say it would go away. I think there was a constant, feeling that like I was anxious about something, and that something would jump around between all different types of obsessions. But the spike of like really intense anxiety and then getting into the compulsive cycle could last like a few weeks or more before I think naturally I would start to become desensitized to the thought, which is what we speed up in exposure therapy. But and then it would kind of come back down. So it was sort of chaotic and unpredictable just because it was based on how much I was doing compulsions pretty much.
Right. It's like the compulsions are what really drives the cycle, and because like everybody, I say this all the time, everybody has intrusive thoughts. Everybody can have
Mhm.
really weird and scary intrusive thoughts too. And
Mhm.
people that don't have OCD, they let that thought in and they're like, oh, that was weird. Didn't really like that, but they're able to continue on with their day.
Yeah.
Whereas OCD, for whatever reason, if you get a weird or scary thought and it just your brain latches onto it sometimes, not all the time, of course, but a lot of times latches onto your values, and what you really love and care about the most. So, yeah, very interesting. Okay. So, what would you say was the OCD theme that you struggled with the most?
That's a great question. Man, I mean, harm, like knife, and I was scared of swimming in pools. Those two hung on for a long time and were the hardest to feel safe again afterward. Even when I was not actively in kind of a cycle of compulsions, um, I was really like kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop all the time that like the knife obsession would come back. I think it was because being so young and having such like violent thoughts was pretty traumatic. And so the fear of like how my body felt when that was happening um was like pretty ever like constant. And then I think about it and be like, don't think about that. Which obviously makes you think about it. And so I think that was one that was really difficult to sort of feel safe again with myself. And then the relationship OCD was kind of what sent me into therapy, because I was actively like scared of, having to leave my partner. And that was after kind of having convinced myself that things were going to be okay. And I had kicked it and I was good to go. Kind of experiencing that again in like the most intensity I had experienced any obsession uh, was was pretty intense. So I think those probably are the two that have come up. Now it's like kind of manifests itself in just this feeling of like needing to check with people if they're upset about something. Who knows what? Like it could be anything. Yeah, but yeah, it swaps around
Right,
depending.
right. Yeah, I get it. I'm similar with the themes change and you just kind
Mhm.
of never really know what your OCD is going to latch on to, right? But the tools, what's great about specialized or exposure response prevention therapy is that it can treat any and all themes. It's like not necessarily the content that matters, but it's that
Right,
cycle that it's trying to target.
right.
Yeah. So whenever you I think we're getting some questions about like relationship OCD, because I think that's a really
Mhm,
big and not popular one, but like it's talked about a lot. Could you expand more about like your relationship OCD? And it sounded like it triggered whenever you got engaged, and it's probably
mhm,
because it was a huge change, maybe.
mhm.
I feel like OCD loves to come up whenever there's a huge life
Yes,
going on.
yes.
And did it come at full force, or and at what point did you talk to your husband or fiance at the time about it?
Yeah, it sort of we were watching some Netflix show and like someone realized they didn't love the person they were with or something, and I was like my head was like, "That would be really hard." And then, like, you know how it goes, just all of a sudden, like, "What if that was me?" And then it's like, "Maybe that is me," you know? So it was I remember, like, kinda walking to my room and, like, being like, "Get it together. What are you doing?" And it just, like, I couldn't get it to stop, and I had never, like, experienced that one to that degree before, so it was pretty immediate that I told him because it was obvious, that I was upset, and I just kept being like, "I don't actually think this, like, I promise I don't actually think this," you know, and we talked to my talk therapist, like, within the week, just I wanted her to talk to him, basically, and, like, tell him, that it didn't have an actual bearing on our relationship, so we tried to address it right away, but it just by also nature of work had sort of stalled because of COVID and we were at home, just stuck at home. And so I had lost all my distraction um, coping mechanisms. It just kind of, I couldn't stop it. And yeah, it wasn't until I got into exposure therapy that it kind of backed off. But I definitely think the change of getting engaged and like realizing like my life is about to change also just kind of triggered it. So yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Um, could you give some tips for people that are trying to open up to their family or friends or
Mm.
their husbands, or um that they don't have OCD but they do? Could you have some tips on like some encouragement or just how to get over that hump, so that if you want to tell people?
Yeah, yeah. I know it's like the scariest thing ever because I think like OCD also kind of convinces us that we don't deserve certain things or like that we're lying to people. And like we're actually horrible people and they aren't gonna want to be with us anyway. It's like all this horrible stuff that you have to sort of like deal with in the moment. And so I just think my therapist once told me like um things thrive in the dark, and bringing them into the light can heal them. And I think when you're sitting there holding this to your chest, imagining what everyone else is going to think about it, I mean, we know our brains can come up with the craziest stuff. And so I I can almost guarantee that what actually happens will be nothing like what your brain is like formulating. And I think that telling people that are close to you, I mean, they love you and they want to be there for you. And certainly you have to pick people wisely. Like, I definitely think investing this type of vulnerability into people, it needs to be people that, like, you're in a healthy relationship where you support each other, like, um, getting that support and stability from people is really important. And so I think just going to them and saying, like, what do you know about this? Kind of start that way. What do you think about this? And then kind of saying, here's how it's made me feel. Like, here's how it's affected me personally in my life. And then you don't owe people things you don't want to say. So I think like that's a big thing. Like you can share in the same way that we do a ladder of exposures, right? Like you can share what you need to share, what you feel comfortable sharing with, but you don't have to push yourself into this kind of like intense vulnerability like situation that maybe you aren't ready for yet. But I do think that people are ready to receive it, and they want to support you. So yeah, that's what I would say.
I totally agree. I think that's awesome. I think sometimes we surprise ourselves, and we're surprised with how much people truly are like curious and
Mm,
care about wanting to learn more and learn about you and what
yeah.
you're struggling with. I personally found that to be a pleasant surprise.
Hmm. Yeah. People care about you and they want to help you. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so could you talk about now, so you did talk therapy, then you did ERP therapy. Could you talk
Mhm.
about kind of the differences of those different
Yeah.
therapies for you in particular when it came to like how they wanted you to cope with it, I guess?
Yeah. So my talk therapist, I've been seeing her for just, you know, we aren't one thing. So everything else in life, basically, besides OCD. And she actually, to her credit, I think has learned more about it since I started struggling while I was talking to her. But I think very quickly we sort of learned that she was not quite equipped to like help me treat the OCD part of what I was struggling with. So I talked with her just about, the rest of my life, everything else about myself that I wanted to delve more into. And then with my OCD therapist, it was like very much like we're doing the diagnostics again. We're kind of creating this baseline where we know like that you're struggling with OCD, and then okay, what are your compulsions? What are your obsessions? And then sort of creating this ladder that we could use to treat it, and then they're sort of facilitating your treatment. So at the end of the day you have to make the choice to do the exposures, but they're kind of there alongside you, um kind of guiding how fast that process goes and what it looks like. So with my OCD therapist, we weren't as much talking about like other things in my life, although those do affect each other. But it was more about like formulating a plan for how to treat the OCD versus treating what was going on in my daily life.
Yep, that makes total sense. Thanks for sharing. Okay, next question. How do you cope with the feeling of needing to confess things without feeling like you're hiding things from people?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna feel like that. I think uh, putting some of the power into the court of the people you're confessing to. So I have kind of told people like this is what it looks like when I am being unhealthy. Um, and if I'm doing this, I'm really not supposed to be. Um, and so then, they're also people with free will who can say, like, hey, I'm not going to give you reassurance about these things. So I think kind of understanding that, like, um, their response is always going to be the same. Like, they're going to reassure you, and you're going to feel better. And so then it's kind of like, okay, I'm not hiding things from people. I'm just choosing not to engage in a compulsion. They already know the things we're going to say. I mean, we've said them 1,000 times. So, um, yeah, I think just knowing that if your brain is telling you that and you feel a sense of urgency to solve it, then it's probably OCD. But yeah,
Yep.
it's gonna be there.
Yep. And OCD will always be like, well, is it actually OCD this time? Or is it,
Right.
that's like the crux of my OCD experience. I feel like a lot of others is that it feels real.
Oh
And
yeah.
every single time it's like, well, what if it's not OCD this time? This time it's real and I need to figure it out.
Yeah. Yep.
It's the worst.
It is.
All right, next question. Would you say relationship OCD and the anxious attachment style have similarities regarding the mental processes? That is something I struggle trying to tell apart.
I mean, I would have to know more about anxious attachment style. I don't know a ton about it like clinically. Um, I would say that like if you're questioning if it's OCD or not, kind of what we just said, usually it is. And yeah, I mean, I think that of course we're always going to have like our lives and our OCD intertwined. So things feel similar. And sometimes I have a hard time being like, am I just nervous about something or am I dipping into kind of my compulsions? And I think that's where, talking to a therapist and getting some clarification can help too. So I'm not quite sure without knowing more about anxious attachment style, but I'd say if you feel the urgency of OCD, it usually is OCD.
A great answer. It's a great answer. Okay, so a lot of times we talk about, living towards your values. It's a big like, OCD term that people say is like, live according to your values, and because OCD likes to try to mess it all up. And how would you
Yeah.
say your experience with living towards your values alongside OCD has been, and how's that journey been? And what have you done, I guess, to live according to your values?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, man, it's tough. I think like when we talk about like a core fear, right? Like my kind of fear that I always had was like that I am doing it wrong. I'm a bad person. I'm not treating people with kindness and respect. I'm like having these violent images. And one thing that I really hold as important is just like advocating for people and um in my art practice, like having like a social justice practice. And I think that kind of rejecting this idea that like OCD sort of, well, let me back up. Also, growing up specifically in the tradition that I did, there was kind of a messaging that you are like born bad, right? And so I think that like taking the core fear of like OCD makes me a bad person, tossing that out and saying like I'm still equipped to advocate for people, um and this kind of binary of I'm a bad person doesn't exist, so I think living towards your values can sometimes be like rejecting all these horrible things that your brain is telling you about yourself, which is an ongoing journey. But yeah, I think just putting one foot in front of the other and doing things even when your brain says that you are not equipped or ready to do them, I guess.
Love that. That's great. Yeah, living towards your values is so important. And I think it teaches your brain and your OCD that we still have the power,
Mhm,
OCD is not going to take away your values.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. Oh, yeah. Could you talk more about your art practice? And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Just in general. Yeah. I went to school for fine art. I panicked on day two and quit graphic design and did fine art instead. Now I do graphic design and fine art. So I'm an art director at a newspaper in Eugene, Oregon. We're called Eugene Weekly. And so I art direct for them, do illustration, and then I freelance as well. So art has like, kind of long been this thing that I just like have to do. Um, and it's always been like a comfort during like mental health, like dips in my mental health. And now it's become a career and it's great. So I make a lot of work about OCD, but I also make a lot of work about other stuff, just kind of anything in life. But I have a ton of comics about OCD on my Instagram and stuff. And I'm hoping to make more. And yeah, that's it.
so much, McKenzie, and thank you so much for just being vulnerable and authentic and sharing your story. I think it was very inspiring to me, and I think I'm speaking for everybody listening too. Was very inspirational. I think it will make other people want to share their story because of the way that you did it. So thank you so much for taking the time. And before we end really quickly, I wanted to tell everybody on this call that for Mental Health Awareness Month, we have a really exciting and unique opportunity here at NOCD for the rest of the month. We are clinical experts, including Dr. Patrick McGrath. He runs our entire clinical program at NOCD and other experts at NOCD. They're running exclusive free one-on-one consultation calls through the end of this month. There's limited spots available. So it's just 15 minutes where you get to not only talk to an OCD specialist, but these are the OCD experts. They train our therapists, they're dedicated to researching OCD, and they don't typically get to do this, but because of Mental Health Awareness Month, and we just really want to give back to the community as much as possible, we are opening up these consultation calls, and there's going to be a link in the chat here. Please send it to your friends and family. This would be just a great private one-on-one call with one of these experts where you get to ask questions, ask how diagnoses work, what treatment looks like, what living with OCD looks like. I know a lot of people right now are struggling with, they don't know what they're struggling with. They intrusive thoughts, mental compulsions, you don't really know what's going on. This is a great opportunity for you to get guidance on how to move forward. So again, please go to the link in the chat and please give our team a free or book a call to have that free 15-minute one-on-one consultation call. And just wanted to make sure that everybody knew about it before we close this webinar. McKenzie,
Awesome.
again, thank you so much for your time. You're incredible. And this was all recorded. So we'll get this Zoom link out to you guys via email this week at some point.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so awesome just to hear your experience too. And I just love you guys. You're doing such good work.
Well, you're doing great work. So thank you for all that you're doing for the OCD community. And it doesn't go unnoticed. So
Oh.
thank you, McKenzie. And I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming.
Yes. Bye, McKenzie.